6 of the Racing Line podcast. I'm here with just Joey tonight. We're going to review the Belgian Grand Prix in Formula One, as well as discuss the event in Sydney Motorsport Park for supercars over the weekend. Joey, mate, how was your weekend?
Pretty fantastic, mate. Went down to the supercars on Saturday night, took the little fella for his first experience of motorsport. And judging from the reaction on his face, I think it really made my night, like how excited he was to see cars going around the track. And then, we had I think some decent racing in Formula One as well to spice things up. I was pretty impressed with the spectacle that supercars offered us on Saturday and on Sunday, to be honest, and we'll touch on that a bit later. But we've had a lot worse races to have to cover than what we got dished up this week, and it was pretty awesome.
100%, mate. Well, if you haven't seen it yet, Max Verstappen got the W again. I think that's 8 in a row, which is insane. I think he's one race away from breaking the record held by Seb and is it Senna?
No. This race he tied with Seb, and then at the next race, which is Zandvoort, funny enough, he has the opportunity to break it. So sort of like it's been teed up very nicely for him.
Well, yeah, and mate, the fact that he had a 5-place grid penalty, qualified on pole, started 6th, and I think it was by lap 16 he was already ahead of Checo, and ended up winning by 30 seconds or something like that. So the guy is an absolute machine. But what were your main takeaways from the race, mate?
I thought that the race itself was a pretty good race. It was an interesting race. I thought the race itself would be a little bit more exciting. I thought we'd get a bit more substantial rain. But then when I sort of sat and pondered what we saw and had to think about what was actually happening in the race, it's becoming very apparent that the midfield battles for the lower places, but then also the everyone other than Red Bull, I suppose, it is the where you finish is becoming much more dependent on where you start in terms of qualifying. So really hitting the ground running, getting a good setup locked in, and then putting your best foot forward in qualifying is becoming very important. And I think the fact that no teams really got any good running in this weekend due to the fact it was all wet on the Friday, and then it's a sprint format, so there's less practice sessions. A lot of teams are sort of hitting and hoping in terms of what they rolled out with, and then what setup they were using, and I think that was very apparent in the race as well. So it wasn't the best Spa-Francorchamps weekend we've ever had, but when you look at the battles on track, there was a lot of overtaking, there was a lot of different strategies at play, and it kept me engaged the whole race as well.
Yeah, I think this weekend really highlighted, like you said, qualifying is becoming so important. Like, we take Danny Rick, his second race back, his quali pace was really good, as demonstrated by the sprint quali. But he made the mistake up Eau Rouge by going out of track limits, and it knocked his time. So I think he'd qualified, his time was enough for P6 in Q1. But he ends up in P19, which kind of ruined his whole weekend. But then you've got the juxtaposition of Yuki, who managed to get through into Q2, qualified P11, and then finished P10. So those cars, they're not made, like, I'm not saying the AlphaTauris, but just in general, I think it's your AlphaTauri, your Williams, your Haas, Alfa Romeo, probably your Alpine is kind of in that group. It's so hard to pass, and it's so hard to make progress throughout the field, which is a good thing, I guess, for ensuring that the driver is making the most difference. But on a track like Spa, where the DRS is strong, but then some cars are really strong in Sector 2, some cars are weak in Sector 2, so they're losing ground. It's really hard to make progress.
There's a really interesting part of the race yesterday in the main race, there was a group. It was Gasly, Sonoda, and Albon, and they were all running sort of in the same 5 or so seconds. And there was a part when Albon was able to get past Sonoda relatively easily. So then Sonoda, after a couple laps of really harrying him, was able to get back in front of him. And then how the pit stops shook out, I think Gasly ended up being the car in front. And it was just interesting to watch the cars jockey, because the Williams was able to take over the Alpine, not the Alpine, the Alpha Tauri relatively easily, because it's down the DRS straights. It struggled more so with the Alpine, but then it looked like the Alpha Tauri was able to take over the Alpine relatively comfortably. So it's sort of I was sort of watching it because I was watching the how Williams was going to do, and I found it really interesting just how apparent the different cars' strengths and weaknesses were when you sort of watch them in a three-way and seeing which cars were able to overtake which cars and which cars struggled a bit more to do so. And like, really, I was thinking, what more do you really want than having races for points at different parts, like sort of different stages of a race that mean something. And I like when you sort of sit back and look at it, we've probably Max is running away with it, but there is so much interesting racing happening everywhere else around the track. Look at Ferrari; they've been sort of nowhere for the last couple of races, and they had a great qualifying, and probably unfortunately that Carlos and our boy Oscar had a coming together on the first corner, ruined both their races. But it looked like they were the best of the rest this week. And like we said, I think this is going to happen throughout the year. Whichever car can maximize its performance or sort of come with a good setup any given Sunday is going to be very interesting how the back end of the season in terms of the championship start shaping up.
Like I was intrigued because obviously you had Gasly finishing P3, so his quality for the sprint was obviously a lot better than it was for the race. He couldn't make any progress during the race. He was stuck. But in the sprint, because of where he qualified, he was able to maintain that P3. It
was interesting for him because he was a bit screwed during the race because he never got onto the faster tires. And I suppose that was the like how that car is as well. It was struggling to get past a lot of the midfield cars, but then at the same time, Ocon was able to race up to, I think, 6th or 7th relatively comfortably, and he was pulling a lot of like really awesome outside moves. And I know that you feel differently about Ocon than me, but I thought this was one of the better races he's had in the Alpine, other than the ones where he seems to get on the podium or win races. Like I thought he raced into the points really, really strongly. It wasn't like just a freak strategy. He was on a very similar strategy to the cars around him. And Ocon sort of Gasly sort of got stuck in a interesting battle with a few other guys. But I think there was even for Alpine, they're in no man's land. They're not sitting close to the top 4 teams, and they're sitting comfortably in front of the back 5 teams. And I think on the weekend where they pretty much said after this weekend they're getting rid of Zaffanauer and a few other guys in the team, they had the best, probably one of the better race weekends that they've had in a while. Like it was.
Like I think for me the biggest thing I noticed this weekend, and I don't know if you noticed it, is you're hearing a lot more of I was in dirty air, I didn't have clean air. And I think the longer we stay with these cars, this is a year and a half in now, they're bolting more downforce onto them now. They are struggling a little bit more compared to last year to follow each other. And I think that's what's causing the kind of blockage, if you will, or the DRS trains in the lower half of the midfield, because they're all similarly powered.
Yeah, but I think the DRS trains in the midfield are still a lot closer than what they looked a couple of years back. I mean, a driver saying I'm stuck in dirty air. I think taking what drivers say. You have to take everything a drivers as a grain of salt, because they will complain about, and it's like everyone, like it's their job. They're going to complain about literally everything that happens that goes against them. Yeah, you're in dirty air, you're behind another car. I think it speaks more to the fact that the battles in the two different parts of the grid are now so close. Like you can throw, you're not really seeing car. Oh, it was actually interesting because last race the cars finished in flying formation. I think every team was line to stern for the top 10. This week it wasn't the case, and in sort of both breakdowns, front or everyone other than the Red Bull at the front and then the back end, there was fights going everywhere, and it was you couldn't predict how it was going to shake out, except what teams maximize their strategies the best. Drivers will complain. I think that's fine, but when you sort of look at the product, I think it was a very interesting product what we got this week. And going forward, the great thing is I think we're not going to be able to predict, other than the Red Bulls being 1-2, if they do everything right, how everything else is going to shake out, which probably is probably going to be compelling for a Drive to Survive next year. You're going to get a few interesting storylines, but also just like us fans who are staying up or going to the races or just want to be surprised. That's all you can ask for.
It'll be interesting as well because we go into so many like good tracks still. Like we still have Suzuka, we still have Monza, some classic tracks that always give us good racing. So Coda, Mexico. I love Mexico. I think Mexico is a great track. Brazil. Like we just have some awesome tracks coming up. And if the midfield's close, like I don't care if Max runs away with it. Like at the end of the day, at the moment I'm watching it, knowing Max is going to win. It's from 2 to 20 that I'm kind of paying attention to. So the other thing I wanted to discuss with you, mate, is because there's a bit of blame being thrown around by the drivers at the moment. Oscar and Carlos. What were your thoughts on that incident?
On first thought, I thought it was Carlos's mistake. I still think the blame, if it was to be divvied up, would be more in Carlos's camp. But at the same time, it is, like I was saying to you just before the podcast, that corner is such a treacherous corner. And in hindsight, I would also think that Piastri was being opportunistic, and it was probably the right move. But I think in hindsight for him, he'll be like, okay, it was the right move, but was it the smartest move? Like it's such a precarious shaped corner anyway. And even if you stick it in there, are you going to be able to pull it up to avoid the outside row of cars? So I just thought it was a racing incident, to be honest. I mean, I think each driver has a claim as well. But thinking too far, like I wouldn't think too much into it. It looked very much so like a racing incident, and really both drivers screwed up their race from that incident. So as long as neither of them were able to really push on, I was pretty happy. I was satisfied with the outcome. And I think the saddest part is that of the McLarens, Oscar was looking the raciest this weekend. I predicted last week with Tristan that he would get a podium this week, and he did get one in the sprint race, which is not what I was meaning, but I'll take it. And I would have liked to see how he would have gone in the race, and same thing with Carlos, like with how the Ferraris were this week, and they could have scored probably a better haul of points, which is what they really need at the moment as well.
Yeah, I don't know. Like the McLaren, I think the rain brought them back. That little bit of rain in the middle of the race, because Lando was just getting chopped up in the first stint. Because it was obviously set up for high downforce for wet weather, which is why I think that was so quick during quali and the sprint. But it would have been interesting.
They did set up for rain because they knew that was the way that the car runs best, and also their best chance of having a great great result. And I suppose in hindsight, they did get rain. It just wasn't enough to really play much of a factor. So
I think it did bring Lando back into the race though, because that's when he started picking up the pace a bit.
I think he pitted at a very opportunistic time for him because he put on some softs. The rain came and he was able to really run the sticky softs while the track was at its precarious. And I think he made up a lot of ground on a lot of cars through that time who were still on worn hards and mediums. And, you know, he was able to sort of make up a couple seconds a lap for what is 10 laps or so, like 10 good laps or so on those softs. So he was, I didn't, from where he was sitting in the first couple laps of that race, I wouldn't have, I think he should have been pretty happy that he came back to 7th as well, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. I think I am excited, I guess, because every weekend at the moment, we don't know who's going to be that second, third, fourth best car. You know, the weekend started off with McLaren, like sector 2, Oscar in qualifying. I think he was like 1.5 seconds faster than everyone else. They were obviously losing it in sector, but the fact that they were so much quicker through sector 2, and it was just him. Like Lando was quick, but not as quick as Oscar. But then Ferrari was quick. But then last week Ferrari were nowhere. Like it's just at the moment there's so much jeopardy in those positions below the Red Bulls that it does make it exciting. And I know people like Anthony will say it's not fun when Max is winning every week, but if you just accept that fact and look at the rest of it, I think it's good entertainment.
I'm finding it really compelling. Like we've had 4 races in somewhat quick succession, and I've been pretty happy with all of them. With Hungary, with Spa, with this one, and I think Austria before that as well. So, you know,
Silverstone,
4 races that were all compelling. I mean, I think people take out what they want. If you want to look for the negatives, and I think I'll make this point with supercars as well. If you want to look for negatives, they're going to be there, and the harder you look, the more you're going to find. That's just how it goes, I suppose. But
nature
I
of the
think,
beast, right?
yeah, exactly. And to pretend that teams haven't dominated, like I don't think there's maybe been 1 year that I remember that is the year that everyone harps on about when there was multiple teams that had a chance of winning. But that's just not the reality of the sport. I think there's mainly usually 2 teams who win a race in a year, sometimes 3 or 4, but more often than not, it's about 2. And if you want to keep looking and be miserable, but like if you take a step back, we're getting some great racing. And yeah, it's down the back of the grid, but they're also now focusing on racing down the back of the grid. Max doesn't get as much TV coverage as anymore, if you notice, because he's so far ahead. We're getting a lot of racing between, you know, wherever the racing seems to be is what they're focusing. Like there was so much focus on the Albon Williams with the Gasly and it was at the end of the race they were focusing on Zhou because he was having a push through at the back end of the race. So, you know, I think if you're a fan of the sport or you're a fan of a certain team, you're going to get something. You're going to be able, they're going to show you a car, as long as you know they're doing something. Unless you probably go for Haas, and even like that's another thing. Like even a team like Haas this weekend, they looked a lot more competitive than they had for a lot of the season. And yeah, I can't explain exactly why that is, but I was really happy to see that as well. You know, for all the Haas fans out there, you know, they probably were happy to see them running a little bit more competitively in race trim. Hulkenberg was looking really good. So,
except for quali when he didn't set a lap all weekend.
Yeah, but like that's in the conditions these things happen. But to then see your car run, like I think that as well, like it sort of showed a bit of smart strategy, put them in the mix, and you just want a chance. But I think it was a solid weekend.
I think it was a good way to end the first half of the season. A first half that feels a bit disjointed because we lost China, I believe. We lost China, then we lost Imola due to the floods. So we had breaks that weren't meant to be breaks, and then it was start, stop, start, stop. But what are you looking forward to for the rest of the season? We're at the halfway point now, starting for Zandvoort.
I think there's so many races to go that the battle between McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, and hopefully Aston Martin, if they can bring a few more updates, is looking interesting. Like you said, I think we haven't been able to nail down best of the rest yet. It looks like Mercedes is best of the rest because they're like consistently the third best car at every race, and the other teams are taking chances of being second. But like, I'm just looking forward to the fact that, yeah, the Red Bulls have taken this championship, but at least the rest of the championship is so open and so compelling that the racing we're getting between them is interesting, but also watching the teams, Ferrari have made some changes as well this week, watching how the teams perform under pressure, minimize their mistakes, and sort of maximize the points that are on offer is going to be interesting for the next, 12 races. And there's heaps of points up for grabs for them as well. That's the other thing. There's heaps of points up for grabs, but also if Checo has found a bit of form, the points are not going to be the ones that are going to pull them away. At that interval of 18 points, which is massive. If they're squabbling over 12 points, 8 points, 10 points, they're not going to sort of make as much distance, I suppose.